A representative and future House Speaker Paul Renner, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be with you. Thanks.
We have investigated high crime zone tax credits for years, flowing into luxury resorts and theme parks in areas where we don't see a lot of high crime.
Family friendly? What else would you say?
You can take your kids here.
And that's how Florida steers millions in tax credits to fight crime, poverty, and blight into luxury department stores, luxury car dealerships, and the Universal hotels and resorts. After we dug into this program last year, the House Speaker told us this is abusing taxpayers and the people it's supposed to help.
It's a program that is not working.
Even Orlando's mayor, Buddy Dyer, said he doesn't see any crime problems there.
The city's map shows 20 square miles of unacceptable levels of poverty and deterioration, blight, and high crime.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
If you get familiar with it, would you be willing to look at it and suggest changing it?
We have had crime come down every year for the last 4 or 5 years, so we think we're in a pretty good place relative to crime.
Changing this was a priority for House Speaker Corcoran. Speaker Oliva said it's a problem. You created legislation in 2017 to address this. It passed the House, not the Senate. What are the prospects of actually getting this done and reformed?
I hope in the future we can do that. What we have done is we've defunded it. So we're not putting any more dollars into what I would call corporate welfare. You know, when the taxpayers have to part with their money, they expect something broad-based in return that benefits everyone. This is the antithesis of that, and it really breaks a fundamental compact between the taxpayer and the government that you're going to see a broad benefit from that. And so sending it to individual companies, writing a check to a Fortune 500 company to allegedly bring more jobs to Florida, the success record is just not there, but more importantly, it's just not right.
You still have outdated maps, though, that a lot of these companies can use and cite and claim that they're in zones that qualify for tax credits, and despite a lack of funding can still qualify for and receive the tax credits because that part of your legislation didn't clear the Senate. Are you going to bring it back up?
I'd love to bring it back up. I'd love to tear all of that out of the code. I mean, this is an example of special interest that have gained, a foothold. So now we're having taxpayer money go to fund the private sector, and it's just fundamentally wrong. And I think there's bipartisan consensus on that, but we haven't been able to get it done yet on both sides of the aisle. But what we have done with the consensus of the Senate is to not fund it anymore. So there's no new money going out to these organizations, and so I think that's important.
Decades ago, Florida passed laws to crack down on drug kingpins that wound up ensnaring low-level players who commit relatively minor infractions that should deserve perhaps some time, but not the 10 and 20 years in prison that they are getting. The legislature has finally addressed that, but it's not going back to those who were already sentenced. William Forrester is an example of someone who forged a prescription for pain pills because he took too many he'd been prescribed and ran out early.
I took the pills. They were for me.
So you trafficked them to yourself?
I trafficked them to myself, if you want to call it that, yes, sir. I never thought of that, yes, sir.
And under Florida law, that's a minimum of 15 years in prison. The judge called the sentence excessive, but said his hands were tied by the legislature.
That removes all the discretion from the judge, and so it doesn't let him look at the facts of the individual underlying facts of the case.
Is that not over the top?
Well, I think that's what we're looking at. And again, going back to proportionality, one of the fundamentals of criminal justice, in addition to public safety, which is the most important, is proportionality. Is that a proportional sentence for the crime? I don't know the details of that case. Sometimes when you dig into the details, there's more going on, but not always. And we want to make sure we're treating everybody individually and not a one-size-fits-all. That's something we don't believe in. We want to make sure that we have justice for the individual and not a blanket coverage that may over-criminalize or over-sentence someone based upon the individual circumstances of that offense, that individual's offense.
In the healthcare arena, one of the problems we have with runaway costs is that patients have no idea what services actually cost until they get the bill on the backside. It's a black box.
Exactly.
You passed legislation to address this, to make people more aware of what things actually cost in the front end so they can choose the most cost-effective solution for them. But I'm not sure a lot of people are necessarily familiar with what their rights now are and how they would maneuver.
Sure.
How do they do it?
Well, this is exciting, Craig. You're exactly right. We don't know until 2 weeks later we get that letter in the mail that says this is what it costs, this is what your insurer paid, and this is what you still owe. Everything else we buy, we know the cost and quality up front, and we make a decision on what's good for us. And so take a full hip replacement in my area, that costs between $30,000 and $65,000. Huge cost difference. And ironically, or interestingly, the quality at the lower end, those lower cost providers also happen to be some of the higher quality providers because they're doing it a lot, less error rate, better outcomes. And so what the Patient Savings Act does is it says for anything that you can schedule, and if you beat the average of, in that example, $47,000, you get a guaranteed portion of that savings with your insurer. Right now, if you go and you do that, your insurer gets all of that. Now we're directing that towards the patient. That can be applied in a tax-free form, a reduction in premiums, a contribution into a health savings account, or some other form of tax-free money in your pocket. And this will do a couple things. It reduces, obviously, the burden for that individual, but as it succeeds and we put patients and incentivize them to work on lower cost savings for healthcare, will drive down costs for everybody. As we drive down cost, we get better access. More people can now afford health insurance. We don't see these year-over-year increases in premiums. Not a silver bullet, but it's a piece of the puzzle.
The election manager in Broward County who replaced Brenda Snipes, Antonassi, said that if an adversarial military power wanted to hack into our election systems, they could in fact do that. Did that surprise you, and do you have those same concerns?
It doesn't. I was in the Navy and an intel officer, and cybersecurity has now become a warfare specialty. It's that important because when people can shut down your electric grid, when people can take your bank account and zero it out, we have adversaries that have a sophisticated ability. It's not just the Russians, but the Chinese, the North Koreans, others that have a sophisticated capacity to do damage to us from a cyber standpoint. And so we absolutely have to guard our election security system. The evidence from the Mueller report was that votes weren't changed, but that there was access to 2 counties. That's too much. And so we need to do whatever we can do to make sure that we protect our ballot.
Do you think it's possible that with a future attack, votes could be changed?
I don't know. I worry about it.
Given your concerns, what more can and should the legislature do to protect the integrity of our elections?
I think there's always things we need to do, and I don't have specifics. I think we always listen to our supervisors of elections. We listen to people in the cybersecurity space, and I can tell you I'm committed to it. Whatever that is, I think that's absolutely fundamental. We've got to get that right. People have to have confidence in our elections.
Representative Renner, thank you for your time.
Thanks. Great to be with you.